Welcome to offpad.com, episode 10. We are still in Ecuador, close to the volcano Cotopaxi, from which area we want to proceed north. Our intention is to visit Quito, the capital of Ecuador. From there, proceed further north, see all the markets in Otavalo and end in Ibarra. A mouse has called our cruiser its home and Karen is quite desperate to find it. Was suchst du denn?
Die Maus.
Eine Maus. As soon as the weather clears, we head off to the national park Cotopaxi. To our amazement, there is no entry fee charged. There is even camping facilities inside the national park, although very rudimentary, and we could have stayed. A rough gravel road leads to the base of the volcano. At a height of almost 5,900 meters, Cotopaxi is the second highest active volcano. We spent a while at the foot of the mountain, roughly 4,200 meters, enjoy the views and the many volcanoes that are visible from here. The most recent eruption of Cotopaxi was in April 2015. We had a splendid day in the park. The son of the Swiss owner of Cuella de Luna cooked up a storm for us in the evening. Next morning the weather was perfect and Karen and I decided to go into the park once more, have a look at the flora and see whether there are any animals around. Visitors enjoyed the various activities the park offers. We met a young French couple that were biking around the area. We saw trails for horse riding, hiking and so on. We enjoyed the unique flora that grows in this area. In many ways, the flora reminded us of the fynbos around the Western Cape and South. In particular sections, the volcanic dust was so fine that it almost behaved like water running down the windows. Next morning, we traversed the park and left via the north gate. We take a scenic route through the mountainous area via Rumipamba and Zangol Key to finally get to Quito, the capital. The highway and streets in Quito were very busy. We made our way into center of town, where we intended staying at Hostal the Centro. The hostel is conveniently situated in the center of the older part of town. The owner, Gerd, immigrated to Ecuador at an age of 72 and started this hostel. As we had experienced before, it's not always a given that you'll fit into the yard if there is a gate. With a little bit of maneuvering, we managed to get the cars inside and camped alongside the hostel. Next morning we hailed a taxi and went up the mountain viewpoint to look over Quito using the cableway. Quito is under threat of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions all the time, and we met people who always have a suitcase ready for escape. Quito is a vibrant city and offers a lot of interesting architecture, churches, cathedrals, etc. Bernd decided to go for a haircut underneath the presidential residence, hoping that he would get royal treatment. A highlight for us was the visit into the presidential palace, where the government of Ecuador operates from. This was a particular highlight. Quite unlike many other countries, the presidential palace is open for visitors. Works of art of the best Ecuadorian artists are displayed. A visit to the large basilica was a further highlight. From here, the Panicillo, the Hill of Bread, was clearly visible, which we visited thereafter. Then we bowed Hostal Centrum, and Gerd's farewell was a little bit tricky getting the vehicle out without scratching the top. Before we left, Yeah, it made us the best breakfast that we had on the entire journey up to this point. Quito as a city impressed us. Clean, we never felt unsafe. Modern on the one hand and very traditional on the other. We soon reached the equator, where we visited the Kisato solar clock, which is built on the equator line and indicates with lines the solstice and equinox. Ecuadorians claim this is the middle of the earth. As we left, we watched our GPS running down to indicate 0 for the equator. We passed through Cayambe and then on to San Pablo. We had hoped that in San Pablo we could camp near the lake, but being a public holiday there were some festivities which made that impossible, and we had to drive through to Otavalo. We skirted around the lake, drove past Otavalo and then up to camp at La Luna de Mojanda, or at least we were hoping that we would find some camping spot there. We were somewhat astonished when we found another camper with a rooftop tent, very unusual in these areas. Kevin and his wife Tamara also run a restaurant with breakfast and very good dinners. Next morning we went into Otavalo and visited their various markets. We found plenty of fresh fruit and vegetables on their fresh produce market. We particularly liked the stained glass art on all of the street lanterns. The Otavalo craft market is a must-see. plenty of handcrafted products to be bought. Women wear interesting headgear, and embroidery is part of the culture. We would have bought a few tapestry, very colorful, but space in the vehicle was too limited. Butow has a most interesting bird park, which is not open on Tuesdays. So we decided to take some time off and drive up to the Grande de Muganda lakes. By now we had realized that despite the fact that we are so close to the equator, it is always cold due to the elevation. We enjoyed the vistas around the lagunas as well as the flora. The highlight for the next day was definitely Park Condor. Saved birds are rehabilitated here, and they also offer a very interesting bird flying display. Birds include owls as well as eagles. The park even had a harpy eagle, the most powerful bird of prey. Ecuador has more than 1,600 different bird species despite its relatively small area. Our route then took us via Quiroga to Laguna Cuicocha. This park also houses the volcano Cotopaxi. We briefly stopped in Ibera Cotopaxi to look at the leatherware and specifically so also the ceramic paint. We were now heading for Ibarra, where we wanted to camp at Finca Sommerwind, probably the most well-known camping site in this region, and almost every overlander will find this a convenient stop. Finca Sommerwind is the type of camping site you can relax and clean up and get ready for traveling further on. Patricia from Finca Sommerwind offered us a lift into the city, which we enjoyed a lot. Finca Sommerwind is next to the Motodromo, a racetrack which gets quite noisy and hectic on the weekend. So we decided to leave and scout the surrounding areas, especially the nature park El Angel. As we got to El Angel, we suddenly found ourselves in the middle of a truck procession. We weren't quite sure what it was for, but there was a parade of trucks going through town. We briefly had a look around in El Angel and then headed for the park in the mountains. The El Angel Reserve has the highest concentration of Espeletia of Friones plants, in English also called big moths. The Friones plants are endemic to Colombia, Venezuela, and right down to Ecuador. They are part of the sunflower family. Very hardy leaves are covered to resist the cold climate of this Paramo area. While going to the viewpoint, we also saw an Andean fox, a very reddish, beautiful animal. The El Angel Reserve also offers another very interesting tree species, the polylepis. We headed back to El Angel to then drive around and get to the other entrance of the reserve where we could see these trees at altitude. There are 26 species of polylepis in the Andes, and we had already seen some in Peru. Ecuador itself has 7 different species, 2 of which only grow in Ecuador, and that's what we wanted to see. We found a beautiful campsite next to the forest. Also known as a paper tree or arbol de papel, because of the thin layers of bark which it continuously sheds to protect itself. We carry on via Bolivera to reach La Paz, where we want to see the large Gruta de la Paz, a holy site. A beautiful road, albeit very narrow, takes you down to the Gruta, which houses a church with virtually continuous sermons being served. Thermal baths near the Gruta promise healing.
No significa quedarse en la playa sin nada, sino abrir el corazón y las actitudes hacia otro bien de Jesús. Santa María.
On weekends, many pilgrims try to reach the Gruta, and some traffic congestion on the narrow path was inevitable. We were looking forward to our return to Finca Sommerwind. We knew that Patricia offers excellent coffee and cake to her guests on weekends, and we hoped that we could taste some of that. Hans from Sommerwind offers a trip down into the tropical lowlands on the coast, which are mainly inhabited by descendants of the slaves. As arranged, Hans Schütter took us down to the Esmeralda coast, and we stopped first in San Lorenzo. The whole area had a distinct African flavor, and we were quite glad to be down on the coast balmy weather and quite warm for the first time in many weeks. We had a scrumptious seafood platter in one of the local restaurants and retired into our hotel in the evening. Hans had arranged a guide with boat who took us down river close to the coast to see the highest mangrove forest. Our first stop was at La Tulita, where we wanted to see the local archaeological museum.
Man dann auch als Plakat gedruckt.
The museum has a lot of pottery pieces and skeletons from the early pre-Inca inhabitants of this area. Finally, we reached the black mangrove forests, which are the highest in the world. Some of the mangrove trees reach a height of 50 meters. In between, we stopped to have a refreshment of coconut milk before we proceeded to a manufacturing site of cocada, or the raw material for cocadas. It is made of sugarcane juice, peanuts, and coconut. On our way back, Hans stopped with us at a cocoa plantation to show us cocoa beans, how they're grown and what they taste before being processed. The fruit tastes wonderful but cannot be eaten because they decalcify the teeth. We soon reached Palo Alto for the highlight of this outing. The railroad we are about to travel on supplies gold diggers in the jungle with supplies. It used to be a formal railway track, but for many years it has totally dilapidated. The local community had to construct their own mode of transport. The vehicle more resembles a truck than a train. Bottle jack does the trick to turn the vehicle around at each end point. Waiting at the main station, we weren't too sure what was awaiting us on this jungle tour. Can any vehicle run on tracks like this? We made a brief stop at an old train station, then headed deeper into the jungle. After about 10 or 15 kilometers into the jungle, it was time to turn around. We were quite relieved not to have to cross this bridge. Then Hans ordered the driver to stop, and we followed him down the slope into the jungle and finally reached a crystal clear pool to take a swim. Fully refreshed and invigorated, we tackled the return journey to Palo Alto. About 2 hours later, we were back at Finca Sommerwind and concluded our stay with a barbecue or braai. From here we continue our travels together with Bernd and Marion into Colombia, a country we never thought we were going to visit on this journey. Join us to explore Colombia soon. Episode 11 will follow.